Where did all these guys in 1776 come up with these ideas? Brilliant, and they were very smart individuals. But it wasn't all original thought. Some of those ideas that they wrote down in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution go way back hundreds of years. The first terms you see in the Magna Carta, of course, it was written in Latin, and I translated it for you, so in case some of you forgot your Latin from grammar school. But anyway, the Magna Carta basically said that you can't put a guy in jail or otherwise destroyed, means killed, except by lawful judgment of his peers, law of the land. You can't deny him the right to justice. And there's a lot more in there. So that was written in 1215. But King John did not exactly do that willingly. It was done at the point of a sword. But he signed it. So when we get down to the Bill of Rights, we'll just go over the quick. A lot of what is in the Magna Carta is also in the Bill of Rights. Obviously, the First Amendment, freedom of religion, speech, press, you can assemble. And here's one of the ones that the government's really screwing around with now, is the right that you have a right to petition the government for a redress of your grievances. If you've got a grievance, you go through a process and you petition the government. It could be a lawsuit, could be just file papers or whatever. What's happening now, and what's happened probably for the last 15 or 20 years, is the government is responding either by doing nothing. They don't respond to letters. They don't respond to complaints. When it goes to court, what's happening is the government is saying, you have no standing. Or they don't respond. Or when you get, maybe you win in the local court and you move up one notch to the Court of Appeals, they don't even hear it. So the federal government right now is really avoiding that part of the First Amendment. Then we have the Second Amendment, obviously. You know, a well-regulated militia necessary for the defense of a free state. Colon, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. What part of that does not our government understand? It's pretty clear. The Bill of Rights is, all the Bill of Rights is saying, reaffirming some of the rights that you have. But they've been chipping away at that. You go back to Gulliver. A regulation here, a law there, a permit over here. So gradually, now someone like me that grew up in New York City, not that long ago, I know you're not that long ago. When I grew up, there was, you had to get a permit or a license for everything. Now, when I was out in Illinois, I met guys from Arizona. They say, what are you talking about? A license for a gun? They don't have any of the laws that we have in New York State. They carry their pistol if they want. Not a bad way to do it. Nobody ever robbed the guy that I was talking to. This is what you have to understand when you're living in a state like New York, is they're infringing on your rights every day. You go to Arizona, New Mexico, well, Arizona's better, Utah or Idaho, it's a different world. It's like being in a different country by what you can do without a permit, without a license. Third Amendment, quartering soldiers. You can't quarter them in time of peace without permission of the owner. And the owner says, all right, yeah, you can put the soldiers here, pay me. The British did that because they didn't pay. So that was just covering that issue. Fourth Amendment, unreasonable search and seizures. The Fifth Amendment is a lot of the stuff written in the Magna Carta. Sixth, Seventh Amendment, Eighth Amendment has to do with courts, bail, right to a defense, an attorney, be a witness, your witnesses against you, to present them. All those kind of things were in the Magna Carta. But there's two amendments that are very important that you don't hear about too much. The Ninth Amendment, very important. Basically what it says, this is the word for word, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained for the people. That means just because we didn't mention them in the first 8 amendments doesn't mean that you don't have them. So you have all of these rights. The only reason there's a Bill of Rights is because certain people were afraid that the government was going to get too big. And they were right. Can you imagine what would happen to us now if they didn't have the Bill of Rights? But this 9th Amendment says, just because we don't mention that right in the first 8, you have them. Now the 10th Amendment is very important right now because the power is not delegated to the Constitution or the government by the Constitution or prohibited to the states are reserved to the states respectively. That's where health care comes in. You know, there's a lawsuit right now, I don't know, it's 13 states. South Carolina, as we speak, is debating basically a nullification law on health care. That they will be the government that decides what their people will do. This is not a federal government responsibility. It's called a nullification. States' rights. In our system, you know, the government is our servant government. And they're getting it way out of control. But some of the states, particularly in the South and the West, are standing up. The legislators are standing up and saying, you're not going to do that here. If you send your people in, we're going to arrest them. And I'll explain that. I'll show you some states later on, a little bit later in the presentation. Who's in charge? Are you in charge?
Yes. No.
Well, I'm not talking about being married. I mean, you're in charge of the rest of the stuff. Oh, okay. I just want to... Who's in charge? Who is supposed to be in charge? We have the unalienable rights. The government, we give them privileges, enumerated duties. Anything above and beyond that, they have to come and ask. They're not doing that anymore. They haven't been doing. This is not a current political thing. It's not a Republican issue. It's not a Democratic issue. Both major parties have been doing this for a long time. Creeping away, chipping away at your rights. So it's not a political issue in that sense. So we give them the functions. The guy who makes the shed, the guy who writes the book, or the girl that writes the book, is the boss. We wrote the Constitution. We can change it, or we can throw it out. Ultimately, you have that responsibility. How you get there is a different story. But you have the responsibility to do that. This is the time we're going to have to make a choice. Is it going to be tyranny, or is it going to be liberty? You have a choice. Liberty. Basically, free will. You act according to your... They're interchangeable. Freedom and liberty are used by people almost with the same meaning, but we went to the dictionary, and basically it's the right to act under your own free will, the limitation being the free will and the rights of somebody else. Freedom is the absence of interference in that liberty. So even though you have a right to have a gun, the fact that you have to go to get a license restricts that freedom. Yes, you have freedom to have a gun as long as you get a license. It's a very subtle difference. When we're looking at sovereignty, this is a big issue now, because we're giving up our sovereignty piece by piece in different areas, and we will cover that later. Basically, the government, our government, has absolute control over us, and they are not subject to somebody else's authority. It's pretty, you are a sovereign person. That's a completely different subject that you started getting into that issue. But you make your own decisions. The question is, the way we're set up now in the United States, are we signing agreements giving other people authority over how we act? Yes, we are. And we'll talk about them later.